In the book of Acts, there's this ancient rule given to new believers that at first sounds a little, well, strange. But as we're about to see, when you start to unravel it, it reveals this incredibly profound truth about community, about identity, and about holiness.
So let's picture this. We're in Acts chapter 15. The early leaders of the faith, guys like James and Peter, they've got a big decision to make. Non-Jews, the Gentiles, are starting to follow the God of Israel. And the question is, what are the absolute essentials they need to follow? They come up with these 4 key prohibitions.
Now, if you've spent any time in the Torah, 3 of these make perfect sense, right? Don't mess with idols, avoid sexual immorality, and don't consume blood. These are all cornerstone laws. But then you get to that last one, abstain from what has been strangled. And you just have to ask, where on earth did that come from? It's a genuine biblical puzzle.
So we really have to figure this out. Where did this 4th rule come from? Because on the surface, it almost looks like the apostles are adding something new, a law that you just don't find in the original scriptures.
Yeah, it's super easy to find the foundation for the first 3. You can just open up the book of Leviticus, say chapters 17 and 18, and you'll see clear prohibitions against idolatry, consuming blood, and sexual immorality. For that original audience, these were absolute no-brainers.
But go ahead, search the Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy. You will not find a specific command that says, do not eat an animal that has been strangled. And this really raises a critical question. Were the apostles just making up a new rule? Well, the answer is no, but to understand why, we've got to dig a little deeper. To solve this, we have to go back to the source code. The original Hebrew of the Torah. Because there's this crucial concept hiding in plain sight that unlocks this entire mystery. Our first big clue shows up in Deuteronomy, with this really odd instruction about an animal that dies of itself. Now, at first glance, this sounds a lot like roadkill. And the verse says an Israelite can't eat it, but they can give it to a sojourner or even sell it to a foreigner.
And right away, that should set off some alarm bells. I mean, does that seem right to you? Why would it be okay to give a sojourner, someone who's living with you, trying to learn your ways, something that's basically rotten roadkill? It just feels wrong. And that feeling tells us we're missing something important about that term.
The whole key is this one Hebrew word, Nevelah. Now, most of our Bibles translate it as carcass or dies of itself, but honestly, those translations just don't capture the full picture. The word is way more complex and technical than that. And this is where it gets really interesting. Nevelah isn't just about the type of animal. I mean, sure, it can refer to the carcass of something like a pig, which is already unclean. But, and this is the crucial part, it can also refer to the carcass of a perfectly clean animal, like a sheep, if that animal died in an improper way. So that leads us right to the heart of the mystery. This is the big question. What could possibly happen to a perfectly good, edible animal like a sheep that would make it just as unclean as a pig?
Well, the answer, it turns out, lies in this sacred connection between how an animal dies and the holiness that's required for God's altar. It actually connects our dinner table directly to the tabernacle itself.
See, originally, back in the wilderness, if you wanted to eat meat, an ox, a sheep, a goat, you couldn't just slaughter it in your backyard. You had to bring it to the tabernacle first and present it as a sacred offering. And this sacred process had a name, zavak. It was a very specific ritual slaughter performed right there at the altar. This precise method was what preserved the animal's clean status and made sure its blood was treated with reverence. It made the animal fit for both the altar and for a holy meal. And get this is so cool. The connection is baked right into the Hebrew language itself. The word for altar, misbeach, comes from the exact same root as the verb for this sacred slaughter, zavach. The language itself tells you that you can't separate the method from the holy place. Okay, so later on, when the people of Israel finally settled in the Promised Land, they couldn't all travel to one central sanctuary, so the rules got updated. Deuteronomy 12 says, okay, you can slaughter animals at home for food, but, and this is the part you can't miss, it commanded them to use the very same sacred zavak method to maintain that standard of holiness. Okay, so now that we have this background on Nevelah and Zavak, we can finally connect all the clues and solve this puzzle from the book of Acts.
So an animal becomes Nevelah if it dies from any method other than that precise, respectful zavak slaughter. That means if it dies from natural causes, if it's attacked by a predator, if it has a puncture wound from, say, a hunting arrow, if it dies from a fall, or, you guessed it, from strangulation or suffocation.
And there it is. That's our solution. Strangled wasn't some new, random rule pulled out of thin air. It was a figure of speech, a synecdoche, where one part stands in for the whole thing. The apostles used one vivid example, strangulation, as a kind of shorthand for the entire category of Nevelah. Their audience would have known instantly that they meant all improperly slaughtered meat.
But okay, why does this distinction even matter? I mean, this rule isn't just about how you prepare your food. It's about a foundational concept of identity, of community, and what it really means to be set apart.
The reason for this rule is actually profound. Deuteronomy 14 links the ban on eating Nevelah directly to identity. It says you don't do this because you are a holy people. This practice was a physical way of separating and defining God's people. And this is where the Torah makes this fascinating distinction. A full, naturalized citizen, and Ezra, was strictly forbidden from eating Nevelah. But a ger, a sojourner, a newcomer to the faith, was actually permitted to eat it. And this wasn't about giving them bad food. It was a marker of their level of integration into the holy community.
And that brings us full circle right back to Acts. That ruling wasn't the final exam. It was the first day of class. By telling these new Gentile believers to avoid Nevelah, which they called things strangled, the apostles were inviting them to take a huge step forward. It was an invitation to move from being a sojourner toward being a fully integrated member of God's holy people.
You know, this whole ancient mystery leaves us with a pretty powerful question for today. If something as basic as the food on our table is meant to be a sign of our identity, what do our daily choices, what we consume and how we consume it, what does that say about the holiness and the community we belong to?
Follow Yosef for more at mishnawalk.substack.com.